Hey everyone, welcome back. Today I'm going to be doing what if Belarus decides to form an empire. So Belarus is technically like a Russian puppet, or since it's one of Russia's strongest allies, and with the Ukrainian war right now with Russia. Russia has been entering troops into Belarus to fight off Ukraine, but so what if Belarus decides to have enough of that, stops the troops coming into their territory, and decides to go imperial? So first, Belarus goes red, and then they go to present the idea to Ukraine, which of course they accept, since they do need help backing off the Russians. So what they do is declare war on Russia. And here is the front line, which I have checked, and it's still the same front line, but a little bit better. And then, so with this, unsurprisingly, they managed to get rid of the Russian troops here. So what they do is just to wait. Oh, that's the wrong color. Okay. So what they do first is that they try to invade from the north, trying to threaten St. Petersburg, but soon they're into a stalemate, and then eventually they're back to where they started. So Belarus decides to become pro-Western in this, and then they decide to ask for more allies. And that was whenever Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia decide to join. And the first thing that they do is wipe off Kaliningrad, and they start invasion in their own. So with this, they manage to get a little bit more farther, and then they ask Finland to join the war, and they accept. So basically, it's just the Eastern Front just against Russia. But, basically the NATO could get in, but this video is not about NATO. So, with the Finnish special troops advancing in the north, capturing this peninsula, and then slowly going down, also threatening St. Petersburg, they connect up with Estonian troops and then eventually take out St. Petersburg. And with the Russians backing out of Ukraine and also in the Crimean Peninsula, the Ukrainians start an invasion of their own, connecting up with the Belarusian, and start advancing into Russia's most valuable area. And then soon, this whole entirety part falls. And so then one straight line goes towards Moscow, probably encircling it. And then this one also starts to get smaller in the encirclement. And then while the Finnish troops start to go down towards Moscow, eventually almost causing an encirclement, and then that does the encirclement, and then eventually Moscow falls. And then a few years of advancing into Siberia, soon Russia surrenders. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty with Russia. So Belarus has gotten Moscow, and Ukraine has gotten a little bit of Russia's valuable area connecting up with Georgia. And Kaliningrad was split between Poland and Lithuania, while the Baltics united into one for economic aid, while also bordering up with Finland, and Finland getting the northernmost of Russia. So, what Belarus decides to do is, I mean, they could go more into Russia, but they needed to focus on saving their capital, which was Minsk, is right here. So what they do is decided to go to war with the Baltics. So what did they do now is that they started advancing slowly into Lithuania, but then eventually they are able to advance a lot more with their troops coming in, and then eventually on all sides, and then eventually Tallinn falls, and then soon, a few weeks later, the Baltics surrender. And then Poland decides to join. And then they start advancing more, but then eventually they push Belarus out, and then they start any liberation campaign into the Baltics. And they also start invading Belarus. But then eventually that goes to a stalemate, while Belarus also puts more troops into the Baltics, and then slowly going into Poland. And then soon that goes to a stalemate, and then soon they decided to go to a peace treaty. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty with Poland, and they got a little bit of land from Belarus, but Belarus would have to give Poland a little bit of compensation for the Baltics. But Belarus is also able to annex the Baltics entirely. So with that defeat of Belarus, they decide to rest for a little bit, and then soon they decided to go after Ukraine. And with the Ukraine still economically, I mean, it's still stable, but with the war with Russia weakening them, they decided to take advantage of that, and they decide to go for Ukraine. So they declare it, and then they go south. Poland could join again, but Poland is too weak economically and militarily to go after Belarus again. So with the Belarus storming into Ukraine, they capture Kiev, and then a spearhead goes down to Crimea, and then soon splitting Ukraine into two, capturing Crimea, and then eventually Ukraine decides to surrender. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here we see full annexation of Ukraine, and what they decide to do is go over to Moldova and ask if they could be annexed, since they're already surrounded, and then reluctantly they accept. And with the Romanians mad at the Belarusians for annexing Moldova, they declare war on them. But little do they know that was the bad mistake of Romania, and then they got invaded, eventually capturing Bucharest, and then eventually going in all sides, and then eventually they surrender. And then since they're there, they realize that they could just gain more access over here, so they send an ultimatum over to Slovakia and Hungary. Of course they refuse, so they declare war on both, and then they start advancing. And then eventually Hungary falls, soon Slovakia. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty with Romania, Slovakia, and Hungary. While Hungary, Slovakia, and the northern part of Romania gets annexed, this part of Romania decides to become Bulgarian. So Bulgaria decides to annex them. So over here, we could see another attack with Poland, but to guarantee their winnings, they decide to go over to the Czech Republic and annex them without any word. So with this, Poland just got mad, and then they declared war on Belarus again. But because of that, they didn't know that they're already surrounded, since there was no word from the Czech Republic. So Belarus decides to go all in, all surrounding sides, and then eventually they are very pushed back, and then eventually Warsaw falls, and so does Poland. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty with Poland, with the eastern part of Poland being annexed, while the western part is being into a puppet. So with this, a few years later go by, and then they decided that they need allies around their borders. So they go over to Bulgaria, and then they accept, fearing they don't want to be annexed. And then they also go to Italy, and then Bosnia and Herzegovina, Croatia, Albania, and Finland. So with these allies, most of Europe don't want to fight back, but there's also a coalition being formed against them, which has Serbia. Oh, I need a okay, let's do this. Serbia, Montenegro, Kosovo, North Macedonia, Slovenia, Austria, Germany, and Sweden. So with this coalition being formed, Belarus basically doesn't have anywhere to expand except east. Never mind, Russia joined. And I guess that Greece also joined, making Turkey want to join the other team. So with this, we could see another world war, but this time focused on the Eastern Europe. So with this, they decided to invade Austria, declaring a war on Austria made the whole entire blue team, the whole entire green team would go and fight against Belarus. So the first thing that they would do is try to liberate Poland in Germany. So they start entering through Poland, capturing their coast, and then soon all of Poland. And then soon, with the Belarusians entering Austria, and with the Croatians and the Italians invading the north of Slovenia and the rest of Austria, they also go into Germany, capturing Bavaria, and then going up. And over here, Albania goes to Greece, North Macedonia, Kosovo, and Montenegro. Eventually Montenegro falls, meeting up with Bulgaria, and then Serbia surrenders. Then so does Greece. So with Greece done, Russia decides to ultimately leave the war, which makes Sweden want to leave the war as well. And then eventually Germany's all alone, and then eventually they surrender. So let's look at the peace treaty. So here's the peace treaty with Germany and Austria in the Balkans. So Belarus decides to annex the rest of Poland and a little bit of Germany, while Italy decides to annex the majority of Austria, while Belarus annexed a little bit, and annexing the Bavarian part of Germany. And then over here, We see Bulgaria annexing the panhandle of Greece, while Turkey got nothing. And then Albania decides to annex Kosovo and half of Montenegro, and annexing the rest of Greece, while Croatia and Bosnia and Herzegovina decides to annex Slovenia, Serbia, North Macedonia, and the rest of Montenegro, kind of forming Yugoslavia, and nothing happened with Sweden or Russia. So I guess this is the Belarusian Empire, and hopefully you'll like the video, and I'll see you on the next one.